Mandla. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm Antonia. And so you are basically Associate Professor of Strategic Communication in the University of Johannesburg. And so today we're just going to be chatting about marketing, branding, public relations, media, and communications. So first of all, I suppose if you'd like to kind of tell me, how you got into strategic communication initially, that'd be great.
Good morning, Antonia, and good to chat to you, and thanks for inviting me. Yes, that's correct, the way you have introduced me. I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Johannesburg. How I got into strategic communication, it was by sheer coincidence that while I was doing my first degree, my majors were in computer science and mathematical statistics, I started getting involved in campus magazine at varsity. And later on, I got involved in a community radio station, and the bug and the love for the media just hit me from there. And therefore, when I decided to study media more formally, with the hope of becoming a journalist, and while I was trying to become an intern journalist, and then I got to PR, and I've never looked back from there. I've worked for quite a number of industries. I've worked for higher education as a media relations officer. I have worked for a telecommunication company responsible for internal communication. I've worked for the government, the Gauteng provincial government, as a spokesperson and media director. I've worked for the bank in the financial sector, Barclays Africa, where I was the head of communication for the retail bank. I've worked for the Auditor General. I don't know what you call them in the UK, but they are called the Supreme Audit Institutions, where I was heading the communication function. But of course, ideas and research has been part of my interest, and that is why I ended up going back to varsity as an associate professor.
Okay, wow, yeah, that's a good journey, all right. And yeah, I mean, I'm actually based in Ireland myself, so I believe it would be called the same thing.
Yeah.
But so tell us, let's go into the public relations aspect of it. Okay, one question I have on PR is how relevant do you think PR is these days? Because I guess like public relations, I mean, what I find, no matter what industry you're in, you'll obviously go to public relations that specializes in your industry, public relation agent, and they just generally have a database, and they just send out your press release that they concoct to a database and then just hope for the best. And if like some journalist picks it up, then they're like, oh great, we did our job. And if not, then it's like, oh, it didn't work this time, and they still charge thousands. Do you think that there's really still room for traditional PR, or what do you think? How do you think it's changed? And do you think that it needs to innovate, and where do you think it's going to go in the future?
Well, let's start here. Public relations remains relevant, and public relations must be understood as part of the bigger strategic communication function. And I'm deliberately using strategic function because it is a communication science. So in other words, when we use the word science, it means you must be able to measure. You must be able to measure the impact of what you do. So it's not a spray and pray approach. So it remains relevant because one of the key thing, or what distinguishes PRs from functions like advertising, for example, is that in PR, it involves building relationships with critical stakeholders, mainly in the media. And that is relevant. But of course, in the context of the digitizing world, it simply suggests that public relations practitioners have to move with the time, and therefore it takes place on digital platforms, a crisis or an opportunity that takes place on a digital platforms, as you know, it evolves very quickly. So it requires you to be nimble, you to be alive to the developments at at the time. So those are the changes that are taking place. But one of the things that I've observed in the past, I would say in the past 5 years or so, is the integration. There is a larger integration that we see, and there is a concept in strategic communication. It's called the PESO model. It's basically the P stands for paid media, the E stands for earned media, the S stands for shared media, and the O stands for owned media, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's a PESO model. But what this model tells us and demonstrates to us is that there is convergence across all these functions in the public relations space. And therefore, what you do when you buy space, whether it's social media, advertising, sponsored content, or email marketing, it has to find place in your earned media through your public relations. But of course, both your shared and owned media speaking to the platforms that you control, your social media platforms, your websites, your company newsletters, and so on and so forth, becomes very important. So I think that's where the profession is moving towards too.
Okay, yeah, that's actually interesting to kind of say that, yeah, they obviously have to innovate at the same time too. It's relevant for the sense that it's kind of building the relationships with potential, stakeholders and things like that. Again, depending on like the industry. But so let's say that the difference between public relations and advertising is that public relations is kind of more story based, where an advertisement is more of a placement. What would you say are elements of interactive PR?
Well, in the digital age, because as I was saying earlier on, PR is fundamentally taking place on mediated platforms these days, and therefore you need to be game for interactive forms. There's quite a number of ways for example, when we speak about how you measure the impact of your campaign, it talks to the interactive nature of public relations, because the target audiences these days, they know exactly what they want, and therefore it is important that you are able to build relationships with them, to talk to them, and the digital platforms, campaigns these days, they take place through smartphones, and those platforms, they enable us to be able to be interactive with the audiences. So therefore, for me, integration and interactivity is almost meshed together, because it's not just on PR again. Buying and advertising space using digital platforms these days is informed by what your audience would have told you through your PR campaigns. So that interactivity, it becomes very important.
Okay, yeah, very good. And so I suppose really like for, how do you think social media has really impacted PR, and where do you think kind of PR stands on the social media aspect? Because I think that they're kind of very different in the sense that like maybe for some you might need to get like a social media, strategist, rather than a PR person. But I mean, you're not going to really have like a PR agent doing social media for somebody. So they're kind of like two different, I suppose agencies. So like, where do you think that PR does fit in with social media?
Well, again, I think the big point we need to underline in this conversation is integration. And I think that social media has impacted PR industry in a profound manner. As I was saying earlier on, challenges and opportunities alike occur on real time in the context of social media. So managing a PR crisis, for example, has got opportunities and challenges because, as I was saying earlier on, it spreads quickly, but so are the responses. So for you, you've got now opportunities to manage a crisis in real time and quickly and kill it if, depending on what you do. Your campaigns, again, can go viral, on social media. But of course, should your campaign backfire, they can be as damaging as your successful campaign. But it is important that social media, in my view, has enabled us to use social media matrix, and suddenly insights can be tailored to understand the performance in areas that are key for your own strategic and brand objectives. So I think that social media has given us those opportunities. Matrix, you can look at issues of growth, you can look at opportunities of reach, you can even be able to identify the community size, for example, that you wish to engage in. The response time is, as I was saying, it happens at the same time. So there's quite a number of opportunities, in my view, that have been created by social media and in the manner in which it has impacted PR. I mean, if you think about the importance of benchmarking, social media enables you to do all those sort of things. So in my view, social media, particularly artificially intelligent powered social media, have impacted PR in a very profound manner.
Okay, wow, Alison, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. And tell us, where can people find you if they're looking to find out more about strategic communication, marketing, and PR?
Oh, well, I'm available on the website of the University of Johannesburg, www.uj.ac.za. I'm also available across all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, all under my one name, Mandla J Radebe with an R. So Mandla J Radebe, as you guys will pronounce it.
Okay.
In Europe.
Fantastic. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for all of that insight and information. Because I think that PR is kind of a little bit sort of, it's hard to grasp for some people because it's not as traditional as it used to be. People aren't necessarily looking to the newspapers and people kind of are wondering how it works. So yeah, that was quite insightful. So listen, thank you so much again. And of course, I'll put the links for people to be able to follow you on Twitter and that into the show notes. So listen, thanks and have a great week, and hopefully we'll chat again in the future.
Thank you very much for having me. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Take care then. Bye for now.
Bye. Cheers.